to find the young Danny, and I understand that was an exhaustive search.
You can say yes. That was 4,000 children I saw.
Oh, wow!
And it was it started off with almost 2 months in Chicago, 2.5 months. No, 2 months in Denver, Colorado. That's where it started. 2.5 months in Chicago, and then the rest of the time was in Kansas City, Missouri. Midwest. He wanted a Midwest child because that would be a neutral dialect, a neutral accent. Shelley and Jack had totally different kind of voice patterns, so this would kind of tie them together. So the Midwest was the target, and so they sent out TV ads and newspaper ads wherever they could to encourage people to write into the local Warner offices and propose their child sacrifice. And there were 4,000 children to look at and interview, and probably I'd say about 500 of those I kind of video tested or got back for some kind of exercise. And the reason why he sent me to do that was simply because we'd had a talk, and I was telling him about how interested I'd become in the mechanics of filmmaking, which I'd known nothing about. I was an innocent, when I went to Barry Lyndon, and I started noticing things when I worked on Barry Lyndon, and he'd start explaining things. So, he understood that I really had a desire to work in production. And so he sent me to do that because I could improvise with children. So it wasn't just ever going to be, if we got down to the point where a child was interesting and looked like, something that might work, it wouldn't be just cold script readings and trying to make sense of dialogue. These were, in some cases, they were not even 4 years old. And so 4 to about 7 years old was the range of ages that I was seeing. So it meant I could improvise with them some of the situations that were in the actual story, and see how they could work it, react with it, and play with it, and understand what was actually happening. So it was better for him to do it that way than to have what I would call cold casting, even in the way that it worked. He did it on Barry Lyndon, which was better than the way he used to do it before. This was another way, another approach, which he thought would pay dividends, and it did.
Well, and I see the behind-the-scenes footage of The Shining, and I mean, I'm amazed by Danny Lloyd's performance in the film, and I see that the multiple takes and the intensity of that experience, as I'm sure many film sets are equally intense. He was unfazed by it. He seemed to be. It's the adults that we're having difficulty dealing in some cases. But you shepherded Danny throughout that whole process, didn't you?
Absolutely. I thought my job was going to end after I'd finished that process, but he just called me and said, I don't know what you think you're doing, when this is finished, but, you're coming to England because I'm going to need you to, be with Danny and stay with Danny and coach with Danny. And from there, he kind of, whenever Danny wasn't a part of any, period of shooting, he'd have me working with the DP, or have me looking for, casting for the small peripheral roles, nothing important, but the smaller peripheral roles. Mm-hmm. He had me doing dozens of different jobs, and coaching, other actors like Scatman, for instance, and working with them. So, it was a really, just a fantastic experience to sort of start working in areas I'd never worked in before.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But with Danny, of course, he had wonderful parents, absolutely fantastic parents, who, as hard as it got. Remember, for them, it was 15 months from when they left their home in Peoria to when they got back there finally. So the very, there were those little times when, it was like, God, how long is it going to go on? And, and I quite understandably. And, but, 99% of the time, they were just wonderful. They never forced themselves, to be, they understood when we said it's better that you're not on set, for instance, because if you're on set and he knows it, he'll always be referring to you in some way. His mind may not be focused the way we need it. So they were great. They were fantastic. And they took it in turns to bring in, when we got them to the studio, they took it in turns to, they'd be sitting in their dressing room, in Dan's dressing room all day, or taking a walk around the studios or doing anything not to get bored stiff, I'm sure. And there were days when Danny was on standby but never really called, so it was days that they had to stay at home in case he was. So, that was all part and parcel of it, and I became, a part of that world, of their world, too, And I would work with Danny and keep working with him in an improvising all these scenes in any kind of period of the day when we were together in the dressing room. So there'd be a constant kind of flow in his life. It wasn't sort of, here we go, shooting today, and then, for several days nothing. He'd always be a part of it, So, and he had a fantastic older brother too, who made a difference to it all.